Did you know that you are wonderfully weird? You've been created to be as unique and one of a kind as your fingerprint, fearfully and wonderfully made, created in the image of God. My name is John Waters, and over the next few minutes, Drake Hunter, senior pastor at Elevating Life Church in Fort Morgan, Colorado, and author of the book Wonderfully Weird, now available through Westbow Press, will help you learn more about your own wonderful weirdness. Now, Wonderfully Weird Living. We do welcome you back once again to Wonderfully Weird Living, the weekly podcast featuring author, pastor, speaker, and as I like to say, all-around good guy, Drake Hunter, right here with me. Hello, sir.
Hello. It's great to be here, and wow, it's great to be in a new week.
Yeah. Well, and especially with some of the restrictions that have come with the COVID-19 pandemic beginning to loosen to where, not that we're anywhere near back to normal, but starting to see a little bit more normalcy than we have been seeing.
Yeah, that's right. The experience we had on Sunday on Mother's Day where, getting back on the platform, if you will, it was a different platform, but just being out and just connecting, even in a very, I would still say superficial way, but in a way that's very effective for what we're going through here. So, wow, how exciting that was to bring people together and people we didn't know. We had a huge crowd, not only with the drive-in church, but also, over the, radio signal along with the Facebook audience and our different platforms. Wow, we just had just a wonderful Sunday, and we're I feel like we're in a new era, if you will, with this pandemic, kind of slipping over to hopefully the downhill side of all of this. And so, how exciting it is to be where we're at right now, because I'm pretty jazzed up about where we're at, so I'm excited.
Well, of course, we've talked numerous times about the three basic spiritual needs that people have, and
absolutely.
One of those is togetherness.
Yes.
And we've been missing that. And just to be together, even though people were in their own cars and everything, but still to be able to actually physically see each other and wave and whatever, just you could see the countenance on people's faces begin to change.
Even with our team, where that togetherness, that bonding, where we're truly connecting and in a safe way, but at the same time, just that face-to-face connection at this point, feeding the soul with that togetherness. And how amazing is it, John, that this is an opportunity for the church or anybody that claims God is their way. This is how we view life, to really give people the understanding how important togetherness is. That bonding that is reflected in the Great Commandment with God and with others. That witness is critical in our life to develop and grow and truly become meaningful to each other and do life together. You're absolutely right on with that when it comes to meeting that spiritual need. It's like water. We all need water. We need air, yes, we need water, and we need that food. So it would be, spiritually speaking, paralleling to that need of water that we've been missing for the last couple months now, more than that.
Absolutely, yeah, and digital means great. It's a tool that we can use, but it does not in any way take the place of physical being in the same place.
Yes. Well, you saw the impact it had on me, because I've been into this, but then you get on the stage and boy, emotionally I was like, whoa, this is a little bit more challenging than I thought. But of course, as we all do, John, we come out of it. But but that lets me know I'm alive. That, this means something. This is awesome. So yeah, it was wonderful the whole time together and where we're at now and where we're headed, because that we're going in that direction with all of our ministries, if you will, and I say that in the sense of my own personal ministry and the church ministry and even who we are collectively. So yeah, pretty exciting.
Well, it certainly hasn't been fair that we haven't been able to get together because of COVID-19.
Yeah, and John, it just comes to mind, I don't think anybody ever said life is fair.
Right? And that happens to be our topic today.
Yes.
Fairness. How about that? And I'm looking forward to this conversation today, because I think this is one area where people form their opinions, form their belief system on a flawed understanding, if
Yes.
you will,
Yes.
of what fairness is. And so I'm gonna ask you to set it up the way you did in your message on
Okay.
Sunday. Fairness the way the world sees it versus fairness in God's kingdom.
Yeah, and I set up that message, and the first thing I did was share my own experience because I come from San Diego. My mom, single mom, life was unfair. It was tough, especially in the area we lived in, Anaheim, California, right there with Disneyland. So there's poor areas and there's affluent areas. And as a young child, my self-concept was being developed through the outside experiences, those happenstances that were happening to everybody else, not me. The self-pity story, mumbling and grumbling, and so my self-concept then came from that experience as a young child, and through that, my attitude was, man, how is this fair? And I recall that moment of, that, I guess it would be the epiphany moment, if we can say it that way, for a little kid, and asking that question, how is this fair? And it wasn't until somebody in my life who was quite firm, quite direct, said, finally, Drake, life isn't fair. You really need to get over it and figure it out, in a sense, as I received it as that young child. So, that's exactly what I did. Little did I know that question that my grandmother offered years ago actually led me to a life of curiosity. And then through that, God just led me right to the truth, because isn't that the reason that most of us search? Because we're realizing that life isn't fair and we've got to find something else. Now, the challenge is, when you step into the Christian faith, I recall that so from 5 years old to 21, and then I finally received Christ, thinking as a young Christian or person would at age 21, all right, I'm going to step into this and life is going to become a little more fair. Didn't happen. I was still in an unfair world. But what happened was my perception changed. How I defined fairness was a little different. And that's where I went on Sunday, right, in the sense of defining exactly what fairness is all about. So I believe is that where you want to go?
Absolutely.
Your thoughts at this point?
Go ahead, and I love the way the analogy you used for the world's looking at fairness, okay, and actually a particular type of political system that points out what pure fairness is as far as the world defines it.
Yeah, many people define fair as equal in every way. And as I shared on Sunday, socialism, in the sense of that political government system, if you will, comes to mind. And but without realizing, I'm careful with the government, because we can do this in our own marriages, we can do this in our
Sure.
own families. We're trying to make everything fair. We see that in the education system, definitely in the sports and entertainment center, where we've got to make everything fair and try to do everything we can to make it equal across the board. Well, diversity actually says something else. That's just impossible. And it's a foolish way to actually define fairness, because we know with diversity, well, everything is different. Then how do you make everything different? It's impossible. So we have to come to a point where we've got to define it differently, because if we're trying to make everything fair, then using that metaphor I use on Sunday, everything becomes another brick in the wall.
Well, and each of us would have to be exactly the same,
yes,
for that kind of fairness to even have a chance of working.
Yeah, and it's just, as you know, in my writings, Wonderfully Weird, that's exactly the reason why I wrote the book Wonderfully Weird, is because you are so unique, and that uniqueness, that specific element of who you are, those elements or traits, I should say, of who you are is so wonderful. And we have to acknowledge that. And then what we have to do is understand where that fits into the bigger picture of things. And if you can get certain things in place, elements and traits and in different relationships, you're going to truly find your spot, if you will, with that uniqueness where God wants you in his plan, which it is a fair plan in the way you properly define fairness. And once you're there, you're going to actually experience fairness in your life in the way God designed it to be, rather than how, let's say, human beings define it in their one-sided way where they think everything should be equal and everything is going to, be fair in that sense. And that sense is outside of yourself, externally. I use the word happenstance.
Mm-hmm.
That word happenstance is an interesting word because it is where we get our word happiness from. Well, if you're relying on those happenstances to make you happy, know that those happenstances come and go. And so you're only going to experience, let's say, the happiness, if you will, in intervals or in just small pieces, and you're never going to get that secure sense that we need in the sense of joy in our soul. You'll miss it. And so, is there happiness out there? Yes, but you can't rely on happiness to make everything fair.
Right.
Doesn't exist.
Because happiness is a roller coaster.
It's like Christmas, right? Yeah, I'm happy. I just opened a gift. This is awesome. But the next day, something brutal happens, and you got to deal with that. So yeah, it is exactly that, a roller coaster. Sometimes the roller coaster is steep, and you're going to hit some G-forces that's going to knock you out, get you sick first, then knock you out if you know how G-forces work.
Right.
But then you come out of it. But yes, that's a good way to put it. Is roller coaster. Well. I guess we go to Scripture where we see in the Gospel where I believe Jesus was speaking. Maybe it was Paul speaking to somebody where life can be like that ship on the ocean. Well, if you've ever been on a ship in the ocean without Dramamine, you get sick often.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yep.
Yeah. So, how do we define it then? So, we've got to properly define it. And the way I shared this in the message and how I want to do it this afternoon is. Fairness, when properly defined, is freedom from bias, dishonesty, and injustice. So, to be fair is to be just. And that's an interesting word. We don't have time to go into that, but it's an interesting word because some people say just to be is not necessarily that exciting, but it can be if you properly use it in the way it's designed. So basically, to be fair is to be just. That is to be guided by truth, reason, and justice. And we have to understand that truth works subjectively, objectively.
Mm-hmm.
Reason works in the sense of deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, abductive reasoning. We have to start reasoning different if we're going to understand and get a toolbox of reasoning, if you will, filled up with different tools so that we can learn how to interpret life. We talked about communication last week, but how to interpret and how to decode life a little bit, because if we only have one-sided reason, and most people are deductive in their reasoning, they miss the mark of fairness all the time. That's why inductive is so important, as well as abductive, which is more of a theoretical type of way of thinking and reasoning. And so, of course, and then injustice. Well, the first step of salvation is to become just and in the sight of God, and justification is needed. And part of justification is realizing, like, well, maybe I'm not defining life well, and I need to justify myself, and first and foremost say I'm guilty of being, let's say, a sinner. I'm guilty of this belief that I'm using that's more hurtful than not. And so we use justice in that sense so that we can truly uncover what it is and do the best we can, become more, let's say, more in the sense of fairness, or become better in fairness ourselves once we get it into our moral self.
Mm-hmm.
So that's key, John, and it seems like I'm taking up all the time here, but think about it. People rely on ethics.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a difference between being ethical and being morally, let's say, right or just. Well, if you're depending on ethics, the law, things outside of you, to be fair, you're in trouble. And we see that in the Old Testament where in an immature state, and God had to set up his design as up front to be immature. I need ethics. You need trust that they have to learn expectations,
discipline.
laws. That's all immature if you think about it. Another part is that is putting forgiveness in place there and learning how to be flexible and grace and all that, along with the different roles and responsibilities in the sense of ethics. That's all Old Testament, necessary, but it will not bring you that peace, that serenity, that safety that you're looking for in life, that truly gives you that sense of well-being on a flat, grounded surface in the sense of our morals now. And Jesus says, okay, you got it, but let's use grace. Let's get ourselves taken care of, as Paul shared with Timothy. Get these these principles in place, these commands. I'm going to show you how to do it. And then from there, you're not going to need law, because when you have it morally right, that's when you become mature. And we then have the New Testament, don't we? And then now, rather than being ethical, nothing wrong with that, but if that's your foundation, you're going to find out life is so unfair. It's not until you get into your soul going, I can only master myself. And then if you'd like, after that, once you learn, as Timothy did in the New Testament, you can become a master of helping people to get to their best. And that's what the Christian faith is all about.
Well, and as Dr. Henry Cloud talks about using truth, grace, and time to go from that immature place to more maturity and continuing to grow through that.
Yeah, those are the three ingredients that are going to get you through the growth process that's required when it comes to, let's say, truth, expectations, and forgiveness, what I just mentioned, and then, of course, those roles and responsibilities. It's grace, truth, and time that both we see with Henry Cloud, and, of course, he's just interpreting Scripture. But then what are you developing? What do you need to know? What dimensions or what traits in your character can you use grace, truth, and time to develop those four areas? Now, this is where my work comes in, because those four areas can only be developed. Again, those four areas, to make sure it's clear, is trust, expectations, forgiveness, and roles and responsibilities. Responsibilities are, you have to understand how God designed you subjectively.
Right.
Then we can use the grace, truth, and all that, and start developing in the redemptive times that we live in, rebuilding ourselves so that we can be the reflection of what true fairness looks like. So yeah, it all comes together, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how fortunate we all are. You're a brilliant guy, John. Dr. Cloud is brilliant. Hopefully a little bit of my work is helping that we just put that all together with the divine truth, and it works. And then it becomes fair in the sense of how you sense life to be, because we're living in the kingdom when we do it that way.
Also, and you touched on this, coming from your book, Wonderfully Weird, understanding that we are all unique. We're not all the same. Therefore, that world's fairness cannot work. Because we're not all the same. We're all unique. We all have our own fingerprint that God has placed upon us.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we have to understand, I'm wonderfully weird, and you're also wonderfully weird, but in a different way.
Absolutely. Unique. Yeah, that unique way, that wonderfully weird way.
And so fairness is going to look a little bit different depending upon who you are and how God has created you.
Yeah, how you sense it, I would say. How you sense or look. How you sense it is going to be different. Remember 2 weeks ago, the message I preached on grace and truth, where Paul says, I must become all things to all people, and to truly communicate and really connect with them, because every person that's in front of you, if you're becoming that master to help people to develop in this fairness, then you got to realize who's in front of you. They're not you. They are, as I put it in the book too, outside of this title, is your thumb buddy special. I have the young kids look at their thumb and realize that, well, if God can practically give us unique, wonderfully weird fingerprints, well, he can do that in our soul too. And if we can understand that, and then when we're helping somebody or actually developing ourselves, we must develop on that uniqueness in those divine general truths, those basic truths that will get you to where you need to be with whatever that sense is, in the sense of fairness. And it will look different on the other side, if you will, in the sense of the bigger picture, because, well, your design actually, if we can use this term, dictates it. It's you have no choice, and it's going to look different no matter if you choose to lean into the kingdom or not, because you're designed by God, by an intelligent being, and you can deny it all you want, but even in your, let's say, wrongness, in your unfairness, you're still going to be unique in that. But it's quite interesting that you can look at a person, no matter their perspective or what their moral direction is, and you still see the image of God in the gut of who they are. It's remarkable. So even in somebody's brokenness, let's say in the sense of their perspective or whatever, you can see the design of God in them, and we have to stay focused on that and learn how to listen to that. And Matt will be preaching on that on Sunday.
Well, one of the questions we're going to leave with people here, and I think it's a very interesting question, is what must a person do to make life fair? And you've been talking about it here throughout our time so far on this recording. But let's kind of maybe get a little more practical as far as what must a person do to make life fair?
First and foremost, you must realize that fairness is turned off.
Right.
And once you realize that and you wake up to that, you're going to have to lean into it as the commands of Christ said. You're going to have to seek the kingdom of God and then go after that to figure out how to turn it on. And of course, we know this. You have to make a choice. Nobody can make that choice for you. If you're relying on other people to make life fair, or you're relying on circumstances, your fairness is turned off. That's the issue, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Well, I can't control you, John. You're going to have to make that choice. You're going to have to make the choice, just like we see in practical life, to hit the light switch. Turn it on. Your belief is wrong. Turn on the light. See the light, if you will. And at first, the light is going to be quite blinding. And revealing. And sometimes we're going to say hurt. We're a church that we want to resolve hurt, but at the same time, I'm going so practical since you said that, was when somebody walks into a hospital with a broken leg and they got a bone sticking out, the doctor's going to say, yeah, this is going to hurt. I'm going to have to pop that bone back in. But notice the difference. One was caused with no intention, where that is being intentional with it, and it's going to hurt.
For the purpose of healing.
Because if you don't understand that, you can continue to say, well, life isn't fair. Mm-hmm. My granddaughter the other day just came to mind. She hit herself probably 5 times in one day. She hit her head. She bumped her ankle, and she finally fell down and collapsed. It was quite ironic. It was Sunday, right after our preaching, and she must have been listening. She's like, life is so unfair. Why am I the only one in this house getting hurt? Well, that was unintentional. We come back around, and he's like, well, my whole point there is we got to switch it on and understand that we do have the power, God's power, through His truth, also with our grace, His grace, that we can turn it on and realize we can do something about it and help each other out. Support, togetherness, huge on this topic.
Well, it just struck me that, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but fairness, when we look at it from the world's definition, is very much about me. Fairness, when we look at it from God's definition, is very much about others.
Absolutely. Yes. And going back to the Great Commandment, yes? Mm-hmm. So, we're with God and with each other. Now, the challenge there is making sure you don't miss that, you need to take care of yourself as well.
Sure.
That's why you got to get that belief, that moral belief in place, and once you have that perspective or that proper truth in place, then we use the commands of Christ to truly develop those different areas, because we do have to deal with our trust issues and learn how to forgive ourselves and others, and it's challenging, but I tell you what, in the long run, it's well worth it, because the last thing I want to do as a human being is my dying breath just going, well, this sucked, this is all unfair, see you later.
Yeah,
no, let's turn that around.
How sad that
would
be.
And it doesn't have to be that way, even though those relationships perhaps, or experiences, or even what you've been taught that, just tells you life isn't fair, suck it up, buttercup. I don't believe in that. We use it often, but no, it's truly leaning into the truth of it with grace with ourselves and others, where we come together and then we're helping one another influence. And now we have where you started, those 3 spiritual needs: understanding, togetherness, and influence, that truly develops any truth of God in the sense of that grace as well.
Okay, so that leads me here then. So what if the other person is being unfair?
Yes.
What can I do then to help them realize their fault, where they're missing the mark, if you will?
Well, first and foremost, forgive them, for they know not what they do. But second, this is important. I'm glad you asked. That's a great question. It's first and foremost, make sure you have permission. Ask, hey, can I help you out a little bit? Because a lot of times we want to project. We're pretty defensive with that. In fact, we had that experience at church the other day, and I had one of our new members, I'm like, come here, let's talk, because you were projecting. It wasn't really your place. And so anyway, so first and foremost, forgiveness, but then we ask for permission. And if they say no, don't get all butthurt, like I said a couple of weeks ago in one of my devotions. Don't take it personal. But you're going to realize when you do ask, and you ask with grace, people are going like, absolutely, who doesn't want to help? And then with grace, you share that truth in a way that's going to really benefit the togetherness. So that would be my thought in that sense of how do you help them realize? Well, with truth and grace.
Well, and you
time.
used Matthew 15:18,
yes,
where Paul says, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault.
Yes.
In other words, just what you're saying. Go and talk to them and say, hey, I have something I'd like to talk to you about. Can I talk with you about it? And then if that doesn't do it, if they're still being obstinate or not seeing it, then maybe you collaborate with 2 or 3 other people to say, have you seen this too, or am I seeing it wrong?
Yes. Accountability and communication, feedback.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And then with the whole purpose being not to blame and to say you're wrong and I'm right, but rather to say there's a little hurdle here we need to get out of the way so that we can be together.
Yeah, and I've heard people use, Matthew here, the verse you're using here. If your brother or sister sins, go. Now, understand, we need to pause there for a second, because I need to get back to that point I made earlier. This implies God's truth, that permission's in place, that we're going to be offensive, not defensive with it. Because I've connected with so many Christians that use this verse and say, well, I have the right. Well, yeah, you have the right under the grace and truth of God, and if it's your role and your responsibility. Otherwise, let's practice a little bit of what Jesus taught us in the sense of discernment and discretion and everything that goes along with the commands of Christ.
And going with the right motive,
yeah,
too.
And of course, when that's what's so wonderful about church is when people walk into our church, that gives us permission, of course, permission to deliver the truth. Well, that's true of the church, but when somebody just is in your experience, that doesn't give you permission. Just make sure you ask. We all appreciate that. Great commandment. Treat your neighbor as yourself. You would appreciate that, so just get into that habit where you can truly do that. And then you can point out the fault. But make sure what you're communicating to is not the BLM, as I talk about in my book. The BLM is be like me, because that's the sin of fractions in that Paul talks about, where we're going to then project on, this is how I was taught, this is my experience and my relationship. And before you know it, if that's wrong, you have the mob rules then mentality. Right. And that doesn't work. So you make sure that you have the objective truth in place before you project or even ask for permission. Otherwise, you're part of the issue still. Unfairness is part of that reality. So because you sense it and you believe that, well, if you don't have a source to go with that, let them know, say, well, this is how it works for me. That's fine. But if you're going to communicate a principle, a God principle, make sure before you share in that context that, yes, that's true. If not, then you're getting in the way. The BLM, which is the be like me method, because let's say in temperament, an ox will receive it differently than a lion.
Sure.
And so, and then that's another aspect, isn't it? Where you're like, oh, who do I have in front of me? Because that might work for me if I'm like, my temperament is the man, but how would that work in the sense of who you are as that eagle, and in the sense of how you reason and think? You prefer to go a little deeper with that intellectual discussion with those definitions and stuff, but just to give it subjectively in the sense of my experience and stuff, most eagles are like, yeah, actually you're going to hurt yourself. You're going to become one of those 3 friends that Job's experienced, right?
That's when you end up hearing, well, that may be true for you, but.
Yeah. So again, so much. Thank you for bringing up the core verse that, is actually a springboard verse I use for the message, but how important and how refreshing when it's, used appropriately, and you can really lean in and help each other. This is such a powerful verse. And when they do listen to you, which is another conversation, when they do listen to you, you'll win them over every time. And that's how you develop a church. That's how you develop relationships. And that's where safety and love and grace, everything comes together. It's a great place. It's a fair place to be, John.
Right. And it's not about being right or wrong. It's about agreeing and being together in love.
Yes. And being patient in time and all of that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Time has gone so fast here,
goodness,
Drake. I can't believe it. There's a couple other areas I wanted to go into, and we just don't have time.
Yes, I understand.
So we do have some questions we want to leave with you to think about, though, and as you explore this area of fairness. And number one, when in your life did you say, life isn't fair? And we've all said it. Number two, what must a person do to make life fair? And I think Drake did an outstanding job of talking about that. And then number three, we just finished talking about this. When a friend is unfair, what can you do to help them realize their fault? And again, reference Matthew 15:18 in that as you're thinking about that.
I think is it 50? It might be 1850. I think I have it wrong in my notes. Double check that.
Let me look back here. No, it's 15:18.
It is, okay.
Yep.
I have it wrong in my notes.
Okay.
Here I have
all right.
Thanks.
Anyway, well, it's not fair that we're all out of time for this week,
Yes.
but we are. So we're going to have to take our leave here on Wonderfully Weird Living. But never fear, we will be back again next week and explore another area of our wonderfully weird lives. Drake, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Always a joy.
Always good to learn and to grow together.
Yes.
Have a wonderful week. Stay well, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us this week on Wonderfully Weird Living. Get your own copy of Drake's book, Wonderfully Weird, by logging on to www.wonderfullyweirdliving.com. Also, let us know if you have any questions or comments via our email address, wonderfullyweirdliving@gmail.com. For author and pastor Drake Hunter, I'm John Waters. We'll see you next time.